All right, so good evening. It's evening over here in India, and good morning to and good afternoon to everybody across the globe. Welcome to our webinar. This is our speaker for the day is Temi, and we're going to be talking about can Scrum and Kanban play in the same playground. So what we're going to do is to start off the session, let's have a quick look on the chat box, and I'm going to ask you which location are all of you from. So I'm from India, so I would put that in the chat box. So we've got people from India, Singapore, Germany, the US, UK, Belfast, perfect. So we've got quite a few people from different corners of the globe. All right. Perfect. Temi, you want to switch to the next slide?
Okay.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No worries. That's a nice background you've got there. Giving us the holiday mood.
Okay.
All right. So just a quick note on about us at Leadership Tribe. Our primary objective is about supporting various leadership roles with tools, techniques, and more importantly, people skills that drive value. So we work with organizations, various organizations, leaders, coaches, and even focus groups. And the intent also, whilst doing this, is to share wisdom of the tribe, create sticky learning, with respect to in the teams at the organization and even the individuals, and also building high performance organizations. And most importantly, it's all about giving back to the community. So one of the reasons why we do these webinars is it's our way of giving back to the community, because we learn from each other. So we've got a few we've created a bit of a short manifesto for Zoom. We're all, since this is a webinar based using the Zoom portal, we're all here to learn together. And we've got the chat window. So this is how we would be communicating with you. So just ensure that when you type in a message, you select panelists and attendees, because if you send a message only to panelists, the public will not be able to see the message. So if you've got any questions, you can drop it in there. Or I think, if I'm not wrong, there's also an option on your screen to put in a questions in by clicking the questions option. And there will be a quick Q&A section towards the end of the session, and we are recording this session. So in case there's anybody who's not able to sit through the entire session, we will email you the link, and we will also share the slides with you. And the duration of the session is about between 45 to 60 minutes. So we're looking forward to having all of you here, and Temi host the session. A little brief about Temi. So Temi and I have been working for quite a while together. Plus, with Leadership Tribe, he's been with us for quite a while. He's an accredited Kanban trainer, and he also has various other accreditations on his with his background that he comes from, and he's worked with multiple organizations across the globe and supported them. So I will hand it over to Temi, and if he wants to add in a little more about himself, he's most welcome to do that, and we'll kick off our session.
Okay. Thank you, RT. Thank you for that there. To add anything, nothing much really. I'm really glad to have you here. I'm looking forward to talking about how Scrum and Kanban, if they can, play in the same playground, and if they can't, what can we do? And if they can, how does it look? So I think first things first, while I start that, I'll just kick off this poll. So a poll will come up on your screen asking you a question. So I just want to know how many of you are using Scrum and how many of you currently use Kanban. So I appreciate if you could fulfill that poll and respond to the poll that I've put up. So I'll just give 2 minutes for that. Yeah, thank you. Nice. You can see the responses are pouring in. Okay, someone says both. Katie, I think I need to take note of that name. We might have a lot of conversations as we go along. Yeah. Okay, Santosh as well. Okay, let's give another 20 seconds for the voting to go along. Okay, quite a fair number of you use both. Interesting. Okay, Interesting. So we're going to go into some discussions about how that works. Okay, 20 seconds elapsed. Thank you very much. Let's end the poll. So we actually have 88% of you use Scrum, 12% of you use Kanban, and some use both. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's go into the material actually. So there's a question here. So can they play in the same playground? And that's the question here. So the first thing is, now we know that Scrum and Kanban. Okay, let's just start. So we're looking at Agile software development, right? So what is Agile software development, right? I mean, this is the home, right? So we say here that Agile is an umbrella term for a set of frameworks and practices that break down complex projects into smaller manageable goals. Now, complex is a real big word there. So if you understand Kinefin and the Stacy model, a complex piece of work simply means work that we have more unknowns than known. So complicated is, okay, so I'll explain it this way. You have complicated, which means we have more known than unknown. And what you require for a complicated piece of work is an expert. So for example, building a house is complicated. So you get a proper builder, proper building company. So they know what to do. Whereas a complex project is one that you have more unknowns than known. So you need to experiment to determine where your knowledge base lies. So, and that's where Agile is very good. So we say it's for breaking down complex projects into smaller manageable goals, right? So we say here that it presents the following advantages. Number one, it brings in the ability to adapt and change rapidly. It's very flexible. Because you're actually working in small manageable goals, you can change direction. It's flexible for that reason, and you can adapt rapidly because you can learn as you do, and you can adapt based on that learning. You have quicker product launch. You have localized and faster decision making. So decisions are made quicker because they're made by people that actually do the work. And then you have greater focus on, and as a result, improved top-down and down-up communication. So there's communication across the board. So it's better. And that's one thing that Agile really promotes, the openness of communication. And as I said here, laser focus on getting better. So they're very particular about improving every time, getting better at what they do, getting surer regularly. And then I wrote here, improved and timely customer value delivery. There's a hyper focus on customer delivery, on customer value, and how to deliver that value quick. So there are a couple of frameworks under the Agile frameworks umbrella. These are a few of them, but the most popular currently are Scrum and Kanban. There's Kanban, there's Scrumban, which isn't written here, but right now these two are the most popular. Kanban is starting to grow really well, so it's really popular now. Then also I said, so now we're asking the question, can Scrum and Kanban play together? So the first thing to understand, what is Scrum? What are we talking about when we talk about Scrum? So if you want to know Scrum, you have to understand the origins of Scrum. Now, a lot of people assume that Scrum came from Ken and Ken Schwaber or Jeff Sutherland or whoever. Actually, these two people, Professors Hirotaka and Ikijuro Nonaka, actually put together a paper. If you read the Harvard Business Review 1986, they put together a paper called The New Product Development Game. And in that paper, they actually used they used Scrum in that paper, which they borrowed from the game of rugby. And they put that in there to emphasize the importance of the team-based style of working. Now, if you understand rugby, a team work together to advance the ball forward. And when they need to defend, they work together to defend their post. So it's that idea that we're bringing into this. So that's why they even called it the new product development game, right? So following on from that, so that was 1986. Then in 1995, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber put together a paper and they delivered that at the Upslide in 1995. And they titled it the Scrum Development Process. So they took work that these two professors had done and then added to it to actually develop what we now call today Scrum. So that's why the Scrum Guide, they are the ones who actually manage and maintain the Scrum Guide. So we look at Scrum as a process. So if you're familiar with this diagram, you know that Scrum is you have a Scrum team, they have a sprint backlog, they have a product backlog, they plan work for an iteration of time, right? So deliver an increment, and they have their daily scrum where they inspect and adapt their progress towards the sprint goal. At the end of the sprint, as the sprint ends, they have the sprint review where they show what people call show and tell or sprint demo. In other words, they inspect the increment and adapt the product backlog. And then the end with the sprint retrospective where the team inspects and adapts their way of working. And then you have repeat. So that is a Scrum process listed here. So that is Scrum in a nutshell, really brief nutshell. But then we say, what is Kanban, right? So we're talking about Scrum and Kanban playing in the same playground. So what is Kanban? We say that now the history, Taichi Ono, this person created this system. What are we looking at Toyota? So he's created a system that used paper. So use paper cards for signaling and tracking demand at the Toyota factory. He called the system Kanban. So he started with that style. So basically signal cards was actually what they call Kanbans. So you use that to signal to upstream and downstream when there's a requirement or you need to fulfill. So for example, we have doors going through here. There might be 15 doors. When I have 14 doors, I need to refill to 15. So the Kanban actually tells the next person that's supplying the doors that there's a space here for a 15th door. So they use that to it, and they still use it to today. But that's Kanban in its own. But what happened is that in 2004, David Anderson took this idea and then applied it to software development. That's David Anderson there. And that's where you now have the Kanban method. Now, the uniqueness of Kanban compared to Scrum are what we call, amongst other things, these are the things that are quite unique. So we have the general practices, and they're listed here, 6 of them. The first one is to visualize. So Kanban is very particular about visualization of the workflow, because the idea of Kanban has that if you can see it, you can measure it. And if you can measure it, you can optimize it. Then Kanban, we talk about limiting work in progress, so limit WIP. We talk about managing flow. We talk about making policies explicit. We talk about implementing feedback loops. And we also talk about improving collaboratively as a team, right? So that is Kanban. So let's look at some of the key differences between Scrum and Kanban, right? So first of all, in Scrum, you have a sprint, a time-boxed iteration of time. Either the Scrum guy says between a week and 4 weeks. Most people do 2 weeks. I'm sure most people that are on this call, if they've used Scrum, most of them use 2 weeks. So you have that 2-week period where you load up the board or load up the work, you deliver it possibly, and then you reload, so to speak. But what Kanban does, Kanban doesn't have that. Kanban has a flow of work. So there's no time that you empty the board. Work flows through the system consistently. So that's one key difference. And the second difference is roles and responsibilities. In Scrum, you have the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the developers. Well, in the current Scrum, we call those accountabilities. So you have those 3. Now, Kanban does not specify any new roles, any responsibilities. In fact, part of the change management principles of Kanban is to recognize roles as they currently exist and not introduce any new roles. At the high level of maturity of Kanban, Kanban asks the question, if you have capacity, you can add 2 roles, the service delivery manager and service review manager. Other than that, Kanban doesn't specify any new roles. So that's one of the key difference. Then also, I say here, cadence-based planning versus just-in-time planning. And like I said before, because of Scrum sprint concept, you plan based on the sprint. So you plan for 2 weeks of work, or 1 month of work, or 3 weeks of work, or 1 week of work. You plan for that duration of time. That is your sprint planning. Whereas Kanban uses what we call just-in-time planning. So basically, Kanban plans work because we're looking at a constant flow of work whenever there's capacity. So if this is your entry column and you have a WIP limit of 5, once you drop below a certain number that you determine as a team, you then look at the backlog to say, what do we pull next? So just-in-time planning. Now, some people argue, or there's a concept that bounces about that cadence-based planning is agile, but just-in-time planning is more agile. It's left to you. Then we talk about also WIP limits per iteration and WIP limits per column. Okay, so now it's a general concept between both of them, right? But the idea that Scrum has is that you take a batch of work, into your sprints. So that limits, so you have a massive backlog of, let's say, 50 items to work on, but you take 5 into the sprint. So you have limited what you're working on. You're focusing on just these 5 for the 2-week duration, or the 1 week, or the 3 weeks, or the 4 weeks. So that's how they limit WIP. Whereas in Kanban, you have your workflow states, and you limit the WIP in each workflow state, or in the overall board, whichever way, but you do it per column. So that's one major difference. Whereas Scrum, once it walks into your board, then it flows through as it likes. But Kanban is very particular about this, the WIP limits on each column of work, so that you don't overflood the system, because you're looking at a consistent flow. Whereas Scrum is looking at how to complete it before the time is done. So that's one key difference. Then also look at here, the impact of scope creep. Now in Scrum, when you start your sprint, because you have a limited amount of capacity, so you pick a certain number of stories or tickets or work into your sprint. Now the Scrum guide says, don't do anything that endangers the sprint goal, right? So you create a sprint goal per sprint. So in Scrum, when a change comes in, it becomes a kind of like a difficult conversation to have. So we've planned to build this, and then as we're doing that, a request comes in for this. So now Scrum says, but this is the sprint goal, so we have to make a difficult decision. Do we add this? So the default Scrum idea is, if I have a 2-week sprint, we can add that in 2 weeks' time, right? Unless there's a major decision taken to add it into the sprint, which is most likely we will say no. But in Kanban goes, if you want us to do this, the new thing, that's fine. We'll prioritize it, or we put in the backlog. Once there's capacity in the entry column based on our WIP, we'll take it in. Or if it's a very important piece of work, we can take it in and expedite it through the process. So that's how both of them handle scope creep in different. Scrum would say, it's a 2-week sprint, it's a 1-week sprint, come back in 1 week, come back in 2 weeks. We'll take that in. Kanban goes, if it's important enough, we can take it in right away. If we can wait until that WIP limit on the first column drops, then we can go either of the two. Then also we look at performance indicators. So the most popular performance indicator for Scrum is where you have your velocity. So most of the time, Scrum teams talk about how many tickets they completed, or not number of tickets, number of story points completed per sprint. That's the usual reports that you get from Scrum teams. Whereas Kanban focuses on how quick we did our work. So cycle time, lead time are the important indicator that Kanban looks at. So a Scrum team is considered effective. A Scrum team is considered effective if it delivers a certain number of story points per sprint. Whereas for a team using Kanban, you look at your cycle time. Whoever leads that team will be focused on getting work done as quickly as possible. Okay. And then in terms of visual board designs, so for Scrum, for example, what you're concerned about is the flow of work. So you have your workflow states, that is that. But for Kanban, we're concerned about getting work done as quickly as possible, and also concerned about WIP limits. So for example, for a Kanban system, we say 3 things are important to actually have a proper Kanban system board. First things first, you have a commitment point. Second thing, you have your WIP limits displayed. And then third, you have your delivery point, or your second commitment point. Whereas for Scrum, it can just be a board that visualizes the flow of work. So the visual board design is different. So those are the differences, right? Okay, then any similarities? There are actually a couple of similarities. Number one, they are both to an extent pull systems. Like I explained earlier, a pull system just simply means when there's capacity, you pull work in. So now by Scrum's design, at the end of the sprint, there should be capacity, because you should have emptied everything in the sprint. You should have emptied the bucket. So by that, you pull in new work. Whereas for Kanban, you pull in work per column, right? You don't wait till the end of the sprint. It's once there's capacity in any sprint, in any column, you pull work in, right? That's one key similarity. And then they both limit the work in progress at different levels. For Scrum, you limit the work in progress per sprint. So you're taking a certain amount of work, that is it per sprint. Whereas in Kanban, it's per column. right? So they both operate by WIP limits, but at different levels. And then they are both iterative methods. What do I mean? They both build whatever they're building iteratively. There's none of them function out in the order of a big bang approach. It's all incremental delivery of value to the customer. That's what it's all about. Because that's why they're all under the Agile umbrella anyway. And then we say they both place a high premium on continuous improvement. In Scrum, you have the sprint retrospective to improve the way they work. You have the sprint review to inspect and adapt the product and inspect the product and then adapt the backlog. Whereas in Kanban, you have the flow review, you have a daily Kanban meeting, and you have your other meetings that focus on, you have your feedback loops that focus on improving the process, improving the product, improving communication between the Kanban teams. So they're hyper-focused on continuous improvement. And then I said here also that both focus on capacity determining for onboarding work, but address them from different angles. So a Scrum team, we consider the velocity. So what was the velocity for the last sprint or for the last couple of sprints? Okay, it was 30 points. So pull in 30 points. Whereas in Kanban, we look at the WIP limit. So what's WIP limit in that column? That's what determines what goes into the column. So we look at the capacity of that column to determine how we onboard work, whereas Scrum looks at the capacity based on the points delivered in the last sprint. So the question here is, do they work together? What do you all think? Let me see in the chat. Do you think they work together? I'm saying, yeah, they can. Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. I can see. Okay. Yes, they work well together. They work really well together. I can't, how many did I say? I said really how many times? Really, like 4 times, right? Okay, let me say it one more time. Really well together. Now the question is how? Let's look at some of the definitions. So Scrum, in the previous Scrum guide, they wrote it there that Scrum is a framework within which you can. So it lets you know that Scrum is like a container framework. In the new Scrum guide, they say what they say is various processes, techniques, and methods can be employed within the framework. Can you see that? Various methods, techniques, and processes can be employed within the framework. So in other words, you can actually add things. The basic idea that Scrum has is that once you don't change the spirit of the game, you can add anything into Scrum, right? So that is on the Scrum side. Now, Kanban at its heart an improvement method. Kanban can be attached to improve anything. So when you look at it, Scrum can take in some techniques and processes and all that. And Kanban can be attached to improve anything. Can take in, can be attached. Can take in, can be attached. So in other words, Scrum and Kanban can work well together. For Scrum to be happy, Scrum says, once you don't change the spirit of the game, what do I mean? The heart of Scrum is a sprint. So what Scrum is saying that if you don't take away the sprint, they can work well together. And Kanban goes, I can improve whatever you are currently doing by adding some of the practices. So like I mentioned, like I listed earlier before, visualize, limit work in progress. So it's even so serious that right now, Scrum.org and Scrum Alliance actually have courses called Professional Scrum with Kanban and Certified Scrum with Kanban. So they are showing you that Scrum with Kanban can work. So in their own view, they look at Kanban as a strategy for improving the flow of value from concept to cash or from start to finish. So Kanban can actually attach onto Scrum to improve the flow of that value across the sprint. So in a sprint, you can, because I've done it for teams, I've used Kanban in their Scrum. And what you'll find out is you can put WIP limits on the columns. So even though you pull in a certain amount of work, you can put WIP limits on the columns. You can focus on getting work done as quickly as possible. So rather than just having your velocity as the measure, you can also even start monitoring cycle time as well, looking at your cumulative flow diagram and normal Kanban metrics to see how you can drive improvement. One very interesting addition is, in a Scrum team, when you do a retrospective, you ask at the base level, you ask the question, what went well, what didn't go so well, and what can we do to improve, right? But you see, the problem that has is usually the problem of what we call immediacy. Let me explain. So you have someone that's had you have a 2-week sprint, so 10 working days, right? So this person has had 7 fantastic days. Then on day 8, part of his code that he's currently working doesn't work as planned. He thought it was going to be a small piece of work, but it's becoming more and more difficult. He's tried different things and it just isn't working. Now, at the sprint retrospective, when you ask him, how was the sprint? He will say terrible. Because what he remembers is the last thing that happened. So like I said, immediacy. He remember that he's had 3 really bad days. Conversely, it was the other way around. Someone has had 7 terrible days, and then the last 3 days were fantastic. If you ask the guy how it's been, he'll tell you that the sprint was ace. It was good. It was great. Everything was perfect. Are they both true? It's arguable that they're not. So what do I mean? The advantage that Kanban gives. Now with Kanban, because you focus on metrics and raw data, you can substantiate that information with the data that Kanban presents. So you can look at maybe the team of average cycle time was 5 days. The person that said it was terrible averaged 3 days for his work. The person that said it was great averaged 7 days, and can go, okay, you actually did 3 days as opposed to the team's average of 5. So that means you did really well. You had a problem with these last 2 tickets or 1 ticket, but that's fine. Stuff happens with IT. But look at how well you did. So you now bring that to the team. So you can ask the team, how well do you think we did this sprint? And they could go, we did great. And then you look at your cycle time, and cycle time has gone down, or it's gone worse. It's taking longer to deliver work. The team is less reliable, less predictable. So you can say, okay, yeah, we feel good about what we've done. We need to improve our cycle time. So can you see, Kanban now adds to the context of the conversation, adds more meat to the conversation and the retrospective. So even Kanban has what we call a service level expectation. So in other words, the team can actually come together and say, do you know what, as a Scrum team using Kanban, we are planning to target this average lead time for everything that we do. So we're working towards a lead time of 5. And then the conversation becomes, okay, so how do we get there? So Kanban actually, by those practices, drives a lot of improvement down to the team, because you have raw data. You can, I mean, your whip can be a leading indicator. Because in Kanban, we have this equation that we call Little's Law. So you can actually use your whip to determine how much you get done and how long it takes to get it done in the first place. So, I mean, so adding that to Scrum, really, it adds to the mix. It adds a lot of value to the mix. So that's why I always tell people that if you're a Scrum master and you have a Scrum team, learn about Kanban. It'll add. I've used it for teams, and one of my teams increased productivity by 400%. And it took about a month and a half just by adding Kanban practices. I didn't tell them Kanban. I just added some of the practices here and there, and in productivity increased by 400%. So it works really well together. I'll tell you that. Really, really well together. Okay, so at this point, any questions? RT, any questions for me to look at? Okay, I'm looking at the Q&A. Okay, so someone said Scrum Ban is a combination of Scrum and Kanban, right? That is very correct. Now, I can't remember the year, the Posit Science, a particular company in America, they were using Scrum. And when the project manager went to introduce Kanban, they said no, they didn't want any other new framework. So what she did was introduce the practices. And then someone observed all that and the results and wrote a paper, and that paper was titled Scrum Ban. So that's actually how Scrum Ban came to be. So Scrum Ban is a mixture of the two. You're very correct. So that's very correct. Thank you. Then, how frequently do we need to have the flow review? And the flow review, you can do it every 2 weeks, but you see at different levels of maturity. But actually, you can do it every 2 weeks. Okay. Then, do we size stories and tasks in Kanban? That's a very, very good question. So now the thing is this: if you look at it statistically speaking, if you look at your work and your sizing of your work, So in Kanban, we're not particular about estimation. Like I said, Kanban can attach whatever you do. So if you estimate, that's fine. If you're thinking about starting, the question is, even estimation as itself, if you roll it back, what is the purpose of estimation? The purpose of estimation is to have proper conversations around the work. Good conversations are enough, or conversations that are rich enough that can arrive at an estimation number. So the estimate is like the offshoot of the actual core reason for estimation. That number is just something you add. But the most important thing is the developers together and the testers together understand what they are doing and are comfortable to say, yeah, we think we can finish it in this sprint. So what we say in Kanban is, if you can have the conversation, why bother with the estimate? The reason is this: the estimate is like shooting a dart in the dark. You are guessing, and the anti-pattern now in most companies that you get Scrum teams knocked over for their estimates. You know, you hear people saying, "Oh, well, that team delivered 50 points and your team delivered 40. Why?" Whereas estimates are team-based, and then you also have in organizations you have people asking team members. I thought you said it was a 5. I thought you said it was a 3. So it becomes a source of punishment, so to speak, a container for punishment questions. So in Kanban, we don't really do estimation. We don't. If you do, it's fine. Like I said, Kanban can improve whatever you're doing. So if you actually apply Kanban and you're currently estimating, most likely you will stop eventually. So it's to die in the system like a relic. You just die if you stop using it. Okay, so that's that question. Thank you. Then, so within a sprint, tasks are managed as Kanban, but the reverse is not true. Kanban cannot be treated as sprint, as Kanban does not have a time limit, correct? Certain extent, right? You can introduce the practices. You see, in Kanban, fortunately, in Kanban, we talk about levels of maturity. So if at a low level, you can introduce some practices, maybe not necessarily all. So that flow-based system that Kanban brings in Kanban, we are okay with the fact that they're using a system that has offload and reload. We're okay, we'll call it a low-level maturity, but we're okay with the fact that you're still using the Kanban practice to get value out of what you're doing. So that's how we skip over that hurdle of the fact that Scrum uses sprints. Okay, thank you for that. Then how will you cover the different metrics of Kanban? Oh, very well. Like there are a couple of applications that you can use that can draw out the metrics. So things like cycle time, that is one of the most important. You need to know, because Kanban is looking at how to get between your start and end of your board as quickly as possible. So yes, I would say if you're talking about application based, there are a couple of applications that you can have. If you use Jira, there's Kanbanize, there's GetNave, there's Swift Kanban. A couple of products that you can use actually will give you the Kanban metrics, even though you're using a Scrum ideology, you'll get the metrics out nonetheless. Okay. And can Scrum team use some capacity for other tasks like release and work like in Kanban? Yes. What Scrum is particular about really is ensuring that there's visualization of the work that you do. So in other words, a team has a fixed capacity. So if members of the team are doing something else, Scrum will say, put that thing on the board so we can see, so we can plan with that person's capacity, knowing that the person is doing all these things. So you might have maybe a ticket type or something to indicate that this is not part of the main work, but this guy is doing this thing or this lady is doing this thing. So you can actually, because the Scrum Master will look at, because we're looking at velocity when you're planning the sprint, right? So it's going to look at who's available, what's happening, what are we working on? Because everything that the team is working on should be on the board. Then how do I have a whip? And is there a formula? Nice question, Dave. So the discussion about whip is a very interesting discussion. It's something that I would say have with the team, discuss with the team to find out, okay, I'm introducing this practice. The aim of the practice is to bring hyper focus on finishing work, right? So in other words, start one thing, stop starting and start finishing. That is the aim, to bring hyper focus on finishing work, one, and to leave space for innovation to improve the work. You know, like for example, if you spend all day doing this, passing something across, you don't get better because you are concerned about continuing the flow, right? But when you have weekly limits, what that simply means that you finish one, you pass it, and you go, could I have done that better? What about if I do this and that? So you try it again. You get the space to go, okay, that worked better. What about if I just do it like this? So you get that space to try that. So when you sell that concept to the team, you can try a couple of things. I'm not advising this, but I've done this in the past where if I had 5 developers, I put a weight limit of 5. I'm going to see. Because what you want, the sweet spot is this. You want enough work to start, that there's continuous flow of work, but you don't want too much work to start, that there's so much work waiting to be started, if you get the difference. You know, it's like if you've ever been to an all-you-can-eat buffet, you take a little per plate, so you can eat a lot, as opposed to loading one plate up. So that's the idea. So it's something that you tweak. Now, for a Scrum team, one easy thing you can do is you can say, for this sprint, let's try these WIP limits. At retrospective, find out, did it work? Did it limit us, or did it overload us, or did they allow work to go through the system smoothly? So it's something you tweak, you experiment, as we say in Agile. Okay. Why is the story estimation always the combination addition of all tasks? Example, tasks need 1 week estimate and the entire story has a 2-week estimate. Then the entire estimation comes to 3 weeks in Kanban. No, we don't do that in Kanban. We don't do that in Kanban. In Kanban, we look at cycle time, we look at the probability of delivery at a particular time. So if you look at your cycle time distribution in Kanban, when your ticket comes into our system, if, for example, our cycle time shows us that our history shows us that 85% of the time we finish our work in 8 days. So I can actually tell the person that, when the person asks, when will it be done? I can say there's 85% certainty based on our current data that we finish in 11 days. And there's a 95% certainty we finish it in 13 days. So it depends on what the person wants. But we usually give a range between the two. So we say 85% to 95% certainty we finish it between 13 and 15 days. That's what we do in Kanban. But I don't see how, maybe I don't understand that question properly. The anonymous attendee that put that. So you have some relevant sessions for product owners. RT would address that. So how to use Kanban for support teams like a system team. That is perfect. Kanban fits you well. Do you know why? You know, with Scrum, a lot of times you already know what you want to build. So you are building something or responding to a request for something. For support teams, you can walk into the office today and you're meant to be repairing this. And then suddenly this comes into your system that needs to be repaired. You just use your WIP limits. So in that way, you have a constant flow of work. You have your columns, you have your WIP limits, and then you pull in work. If, for example, now, if you're currently working on this, and this is your server, so without this, the whole system is down, you can expedite it. Kanban allows for that. You can expedite it through the system, or if there's capacity, you can pull it in and go as a high priority item. Let's work on that and get it through the system. So, for example, now, if they told you that thing needed to be done in 3 days, and you know your current cycle time is 7 days at 85% certainty and 10 days at 95% certainty, it coming to you today, you have 3 days to do it. So meaning Monday, it means you can't make it if you go through your normal process. So you can expedite. So Kanban is very open. Kanban is like, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. So for support teams, Kanban works really well. Okay. Can sprint be extended? Are there any possibility in Agile if extended? How we manage? No, in Scrum, we say a sprint should be standard. You don't change the duration of a sprint. If it's 2 weeks, it stays 2 weeks. If it's 3 weeks, it stays 3 weeks. So you don't tweak the duration of a sprint in Scrum. It's fixed. The reason is what Scrum wants to have is a heartbeat. You know, like how your heart beats, doom, doom. You want to have that kind of heartbeat idea. So you have a period of time where you do something, then you check. You do something, then you check. So that's the idea behind sprint. So why is retrospective unreliable in Scrum? Well, it's not that it's unreliable. It's just that the more data sets you have, the better. So currently, your data set is how the people feel about what they can remember about the last 2 weeks. Do you understand? And how they feel about what they remember. But if you have raw data, objective, because the challenge there is that data is subjective. It's how I feel. So if, for example, I've had a horrible sprint and on this morning, someone gave me a brand new Mercedes GLE 2021, I'll be feeling quite happy. So even though I've had a horrible sprint, my opinion will be a bit now still be quite high on the new car. So it's subjective. And if, for example, I had a fantastic sprint, but on the way to work, someone hit my car, it will also show up in my response. I will not be the most, I'll be like, yeah, the sprint was okay, it was okay. But if I have objective data, then you can actually substantiate, validate, or invalidate whatever claims you are putting together in sprint retrospective. So that's why Kanban adds to that quality. Then can both Scrum and Kanban method be used to introduce new teams to Agile? That's a very good question. It can. It depends on the method of introduction. So for example, this is a team that's completely blank to Agile. You can take them step by step. Scrum is very good when it comes to team-based ideology. Like I said, the rugby game. So if you want to first of all start from the team-based part of it, you can bring Scrum in and then subsequently add the practices of Kanban. So you can go both ways, to be fair. You can introduce them to Kanban first, or you can introduce them to Scrum first. It depends. Okay. Okay, I met a Scrum Master who claims, so if no, any preference. So if both of them can work together, do I have any particular preference? That's a very good question. I think it's contextual. I always believe that the best tool depends on where you need to use the tool. So like someone said, if all you have is a hammer in your toolbox, every problem is a nail. But if you have a complete toolbox, you can address any problem that you see properly. So it depends on whatever context you're looking at. So, okay, so Hayden says, I've met a Scrum Master who claims Scrum Ban means you have all the sprint events. The only difference is that you don't have to make sure you complete whatever is committed to in the current iteration. I'm not sure how true that is, but gut feeling is a bit weird. So I want to get advice from you. Is that really true? You're correct. It is weird. Because if I understand Scrum Ban very well, to be fair, I haven't studied it properly. I'll give you that. But if I understand it properly, you wouldn't call it Scrum Ban if you don't, because like I said, the heart of Scrum is a sprint. So if you're going to use the word Scrum in anything, unless you're just naming a Scrum Ban for yourself, that sprint still has to be there. So the difference may be, I don't know, you have a point there. You actually may be correct. I need to study it a bit more. I bought the person that coined it Scrum Ban actually wrote a book. And to be fair, the book is a bit thick, so I haven't gotten to the depth of it yet. Because in my mind, if I was going to use both, I will still keep the spirit of Scrum. There, I'll keep those sprints. Because at the end, I think it depends. To be fair, let me think about it very, very well. It depends. Because in some situations, you want to keep those 2 week. So what some people popularly do is you still keep the fixed event at the end of 2 weeks. So I think, yeah, your Scrum Master actually has a very good point there. You keep the event at the end of every 2 weeks, but you still flow work in. But you see, where the challenge can be is when you then want to create a hyper focus on a sprint goal. Do you understand? But it is possible. It just takes, I think it takes a Scrum Master that knows what he's doing to expertly go through the differences so that the team still is focused, the team still produces value at a regular iteration. So it takes someone that knows what he's doing. Okay. What are your recommendations for newbies to kick off smoothly? Ooh. So newbies to Agile to Scrum to Kanban, I would say attend things like this. One, join the communities, join the meetups. I read a lot of books. If I show you my library is on the side, I have a lot of books that I read. To read books, you can also take certifications, or not necessarily take certifications, but attend the classes. Like if we're interested in Scrum, I'll say go to scrum.org. The classes are really good. So they will take you, at least if you're looking at Scrum Master, the PSM1 is a really good class, and the PSPO1 as well is a really, really good class. So I'll say that as well. Then how effective can the Scrum Master be in a Kanban team? Very effective. Like I said, Kanban will improve whatever you do. You can see behind me, I use Kanban for my life. And I can dare tell you, from the time I started this, I've increased my productivity by almost 500%. there are things that lagged for years that I wanted to do because I didn't have a visualization. As soon as I put them up, I did them and much more, but they had lagged for years. So it will definitely improve the Scrum Master's work, definitely. Then quality and other ET issues, many of the team facing today. Do we have detailed study of assessing quality and improvement for business case or so? I don't really. Praveen, could you add so? Could you maybe put that question? I'm not really sure of the question there. Do you have a detailed study of the assessing quality and improvement from business case or so? If you can maybe rephrase the question, I can get the actual question out of it. What's the time? Oh, okay. Any reports that showcase Kanban progress? Yeah, your cycle time distribution and scatter plot and your cumulative flow diagram if you're using Kanban. Your cycle time histogram and distribution show the cycle time as you're progressing your work. But the CFD is an ongoing storyteller that shows you the impact of your decisions. So you see your WIP expand, you see reduce, you see that. So it actually is an ongoing storyteller. Then some light on value stream mapping, please. Okay, because it said please. So value stream mapping is a method that you map a value stream. Basically, you look at so concept to cash, right? So in organizations we are siloed by departments, but something runs through regularly, and that is the value stream. So in value stream mapping, you look at that value stream. So for example, customer service, a call comes in, it produces a workflow, eventually someone responds to the call and addresses the issue. So in value stream map, you look at that, and then what you're looking for is how to optimize that. So you look at the time for activities, and then you look at what is the biggest draw on time, and you look at how to improve that. So for example, you send me an email, it takes me 4 hours to respond, and then I respond. So overall time is maybe 4 hours and 10 minutes, 5 minutes for you to write the email, 5 minutes for me to eventually type my response and send to you. So in the value stream mapping exercise, you look at that 4 hours it took that I was away from my computer, and then the question again gets asked. So Tammy was away for 4 hours for work. Can that email could it have been answered by somebody else? Then the exercise could then produce the answer, yes. Okay, so put the email in a communal email and let whoever is available answer at that time. So that way we cut out some time. So it's to make it more efficient as a value stream. That's what you do in value stream mapping. So I just put some lights on that. So Krishna says, is the concept of sprint extended? Is it possible in Agile or safe Agile? No, we don't even safe, we don't think about extending the sprint. You fix the sprint because you have to look at it as an experimental base. So you have to have some consistency in your experiments. If everything is variable, then you don't know what worked. So having the sprint fixed at a particular duration is actually good practice. In fact, it's necessary to make it work. Okay. Now, how are induced defects handled? Oh, there's so many questions. Okay. Artie, just tell me when I've shot beyond the time I meant to shoot, okay?
Sure, Temi. We've got about 5 more minutes that we can give in for some more questions, and then we will have to look at wrapping up the session. I do understand there are a lot of questions that participants have asked, and it's really nice to see these questions. However, time is of essence here. Yeah. And what we can do is we'll look through all your questions, and if we have not covered those questions, we will look at creating another webinar in the near future to kind of tackle these kind of questions that have come in. And hopefully we get to see you all in that also and cover that.
Okay, so how are defects handled? How are induced defects handled? So how are defects handled? Like in Scrum, how do you handle defects? So you build something and then there's an error. There's a defect, right? So it depends. If the tester catches it, then what you do in Scrum or normal good processes is that you might create a secondary ticket that addresses the issue that the tester caught, or you can fix in that current ticket and then put the information there, but drive the intelligence back to the team. So basically, if it's something that's built out of spec, am I building plenty of that? Once you catch the defect and it's corrected, and you tell the team this is the correct spec, so you don't repeat the defect. So that works between Scrum and Kanban as well. Then on cycle time, what other metrics are used in Kanban? Quite a number. So cycle time is the most important, but you have, even in cycle time, you have two proponents. You have system, and then you have customer, cycle time or lead time. Then you have your work in progress limits. You have your throughput, which are delivery rates, or how many things get done over a period of time. Then you also have defect rates. I think there are about 7 or 8 different metrics. But like I said, the most important and the hyper-focused one is cycle time. Okay? I say that somewhere the teams don't value retrospective. Ooh, that's dangerous. And don't open up much. Fear of Cold War, which may arise, to speaking about what didn't come out well. How to make it effective without pointing at anyone. Okay, so the first thing is that even in Scrum, the idea of the retrospective, you have to go in one mentality and you have to pass it across. That we believe we did the best that we could do based on what we know or what we knew. So we're going to come into retrospective to see what we can do to improve. So first things, I'll say celebrate your victories. Don't hammer too much on what went well or what didn't go well. Celebrate your victories. Establish the victories that yes, you have come this far. Then objectively look at what didn't go well. So if you read Esther Darby's book about sprint retrospectives, you can actually use different techniques. So it might be that your questioning style might be interrogative. In other words, what didn't go well? What didn't go well? Why didn't that go well? So it looks like it might come out as an interrogation. But if you use information gathering techniques that you might find online at Future Retrospective and the rest of them, you then find that people are more willing to talk about it because it's objective. It's not subjective. It's not what did Tammy do well. It's what didn't we do well as a team. Because we have to tell them that the aim is to improve. It's not to catch people that didn't do their work or that didn't do well. It's to find how we as a collective can improve our work and our process. So, and then one thing that also makes it retrospective ineffective is, like in Scrum, we say there has to be transparency for it to inspect. But if you don't adapt, then those two processes are useless. In other words, if the team says to get better, we need to jump twice every morning. The next day, as soon as the sprint starts, the Scrum Master must ensure that they jump twice every morning. They have to see you following up on the actions, because that way, what you find that will happen is that they get more confident to bring out more suggestions because they know that you will act on it or you will ensure that they act on it. But if they say something and then the sprint starts and they don't see any action regarding that thing, they will think it's a waste of their time. So they will think you just call them together to blame them and not do anything about it. So it's one of those 3 things I just pointed out. Okay, then we use Kanban and Scrum for IT infra operations. It's fun, thanks. Nice, well done. Nice, that's good to know. Then do we need to commit to a date for a Kanban task? Yes and no. So you give a forecast. Even in Scrum, you give a forecast. It's you are working towards something. But in Kanban, the difference is that you have raw data of your past to go by. So the team might have an inbuilt team SLE. So the team is trying to get everything done by this time. But you have your data as your backup to go. I'm working together for the last 3 months, and on average, we finish every ticket that comes to our system in 5 days. So you are predictable to a certain extent. So you, like I said, you give a range. So if you use any of those applications I mentioned, GetNave, Swift Kanban, Kanbanize, and co. When you look at your cycle time distribution, you can find what your 85th percentile is and what your 95th percentile is. So if the person is, on your case for certainty, you go for the higher numbers. So you might say 85% certainty take us 5 days, and then 95% certainty take us 7 days. You can say between 5 and 7 days because you're looking at your data. So you have something to go by as opposed to, I think, this kind of days. So that's what you do in Kanban. Then what is the use of a 2-week fixed sprints in a process including Kanban? Well, there's so many things. So first things first is might be your organization's ability to ingest new. So for example, at your review, your sprint review, you need RT to see this. Now RT isn't available every weekend or every Friday. She can be available every 2 weeks. So you stick to that and go, okay, since RT needs to see this thing to be happy, to take it off or to tell us what we've missed, we will then build our cadence around her availability. So we will build it to every 2 weeks, knowing that we can get feedback from her. So that's where Kanban is a bit flexible, because Kanban looks at the context. What context works? Okay. Thanks for noting it, Tembi. Many teams have a problem in filling quality right at the end of the sprint because the release to the customer is practically a few months ahead. So when I release the quality issue due to the real test environment, you have to study and best practice addressing such quality issues. Yes, yes. Now the thing is, a lot of times you find, so what you are having there is something we call Scrum waterfall. So even in your Scrum team, it's possible that you have silos where the developers build and they throw it over the wall to the testers. The testers test and they throw it over the wall to the DevOps to release. You need to have a proper team-based structure where the developers and testers and whoever does the release are in communication. So that way, because if you don't have that communication between them and they're siloed, the testers will be happy when they catch tests. That job is to catch bugs. But because of I'm a bug catcher, so they won't communicate to the developers what they should do to prevent the bugs from, coming up. They'll be happy they are saving bugs, they're catching bugs, right? So if you have that communication, then even if you release stuff and there are issues, now the issues could be spec issues. So the customers change their mind, they want blue as opposed to red. You can't do much about that. But it could also be we've done it wrong. So there's doing it wrong, there's doing the wrong thing. Either of those two. Now, if you have this communicative process where everybody contributes to what is going on, it's easier, it's better. One, and then if you also have collaboration with the customer. Remember, one of the Agile values is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So if you have that collaboration with the customer, then you should be able to a certain extent reduce the appearance of these two things, either doing it wrong or doing the wrong thing. It should reduce a lot.